It has been a couple of days since Wuthering Waves version 3.5 dropped, and as always, it has sparked a massive amount of discussion across the gacha space. And this is not particularly surprising. I mean, that's pretty much what we've come to expect whenever a new Wuthering Waves update releases. But there is something that feels very different about this one. I mean, compared to previous versions where the conversation was overwhelmingly positive, the discussion surrounding 3.5 has been surprisingly mixed. Now, don't get me wrong, there has still been plenty of praise for this update. But mixed into all that positivity has been a noticeable amount of disappointment. A growing sentiment that Wuthering Waves simply did not deliver the way we've become accustomed to. So the question we're going to answer in this video is simple. What is actually going on here? Is this a case of Wuthering Waves genuinely dropping the ball? Did Kuro Games fail to take the story seriously this time around? Or is there a lot more nuance to this conversation that people are giving it credit for? That is exactly what we're going to talk about in this video. So if you're into this kind of content, make sure to leave a like on the video and let me know your thoughts in the comments. What did you think of version 3.5 story? Did you enjoy it? Were the criticisms justified? Or do you think people are missing something? Tell me that in the comments below, and of course don't forget to subscribe if you're on any of my future videos. Alright, let's get into it. Now, if we're going to talk about the 3.5 experience, I think there are two major areas we need to look at. The first is the presentation, essentially everything outside the entertainment factor. And this is very important because if you've been paying attention, there's a very obvious parallel between version 3.5 and version 3.0. Both updates introduced an entirely new region, an entirely new cast of characters, an entirely new story for players to experience. But if you remember the conversation surrounding 3.0, the criticism wasn't aimed solely at the particular story being told. No, a lot of those complaints were directed at Wuthering Waves storytelling as a whole. I mean, people pointed to certain issues and argued that they were fundamental flaws in the game's narrative design. So now that we're here again with another major region, another fresh cast of characters, and most importantly, another opportunity to make a first impression, the question becomes, has Wuthering Waves actually grown? Has Kuro Games learned from the criticism surrounding 3.0, or has the game remained stagnant, repeating many of the same mistakes people pointed out months ago? After answering that, we then move into what I believe is a very important discussion, the entertainment factor. I mean, presentation is one thing, but at the end of the day, what determines whether a story stays in people's mind is how entertaining the story actually is. So does version 3.5 deliver a story that was genuinely engaging? Did it give us something memorable that is worth talking about? Or were there elements of the narrative that ultimately dragged down the entire experience? That's what we'll talk about in that section. So with all that being said, let us start with the presentation. Starting with the single biggest talking points that surrounded Wuthering Waves during version 3.0. Character integration. Now, just to give a quick refresher, since we've already talked about this countless times, the core of the community's issue with Wuthering Waves character integration was the idea that characters were essentially left behind. And to be fair, especially looking back at the Chisa situation in 3.0, this wasn't something born out of doom posting or blind hatred, no. One could say it was a genuine issue. I mean, this became such a noticeable problem that in one way or another, it affected Chisa's appearance in almost every major story we've gotten since then, including this version 3.5 story. I mean, very early into the story, we get this scene where the rover is graduating from Star Torch Academy, and the scene itself is absolutely phenomenal. It was brilliantly presented, emotionally satisfying, but there was one moment that had me shaking my head just a little bit. Chisa's conversation with the rover. Now, Chisa speaking to the rover in and of itself is completely fine. I mean, regardless of everything else, she is still a friend. It makes perfect sense that she'd want to say goodbye. The problem, however, lies in how the conversation was presented. I mean, when Chisa was talking to the rover, you can understand that the game itself wanted to make that moment emotional. The background suddenly turns pink. The moment itself feeling different from every other conversation the rover had with the characters before Chisa. Like the game was trying to convince us that there is something special between these two characters. Something that we as players fully understand simply does not exist. Strictly due to how Chisa was integrated into the Lahayore story. And because of that, I felt absolutely nothing. And I know this applies to Chisa specifically because when the game does this exact same thing with Imith, it actually worked. That moment moved me. It made sense. It made me want to stay in the scene just a little longer. So when you understand just how important character integration is in a story like this, how an entire character can live or die based on how well they're integrated into the story, you have to ask one question. Did Wuthering Waves really not learn anything from version 3.0? Is version 3.5 making the exact same mistake all over again? And I am glad to say absolutely not. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that Wuthering Waves went beyond what was expected when it came to character integration in this story. I mean, yes, Yang is the banner character of this version, and because of that, it would have been very easy for the writers to fall into the exact same trap they did with Lene back in 3.0. They could have isolated the rover and Yang, keeping the two of them together throughout the entire story. They could have created a situation where, for little to no reason, only the rover and Yang were available to deal with the looming threats. But instead, the writers did the complete opposite. In fact, the approach to this story is so different from 3.0 that it actually reminds me so much more of version 2.0. I mean, this is a story where everyone was involved. Everyone had a role to play, even if it was only in the smallest ways. The Jinjo characters all contributed however they could, with the game giving us clear and satisfying explanations as to why certain characters couldn't accompany us on the journey, fixing any cheater situation that might arise in version 3.5. Then moving into Zhuangfang, the new region, and whether it's through the Rover's perspective or Yang and Sui Sui's perspective, we're given more than enough time with other main characters in the story, other characters who weren't even being marketed. I mean, this story genuinely changed Jingran from being one of the most forgettable characters in the entire lineup to really becoming one of the best and most memorable, simply due to how that character was integrated, and even more so, the performance of the voicing of that character. And watching that shift in the community perception was incredibly satisfying. But more than simply character integration, another integration that this story kept in that simply did nothing but improve its entire experience were the NPCs. I mean, you can tell that the writers deliberately wanted to shift perspective. They wanted us to experience this world through the eyes of ordinary people, the regular citizens, the soldiers, the people who don't usually get to stand at the center of the story. And I think that decision really pays off. I mean, with how we understand Wuthering Waves have always designed their NPCs, with the amount of detail and personality they put into them, making it harder to tell some of them from actual playable characters, you would understand that that level of care makes these moments feel much more believable, and makes their stories, the emotion and determination they display within them, feel like something that you as the audience would want to root for as much as you would the actual playable characters. And really, these are details that you can't help but appreciate. Even during the final arc of the story, when going into the climax, the game makes sure not to make the same mistake they did in 3.0. They explain exactly why the people who are present, and the people who are not aren't. Everything feels justified, and that is what makes a huge difference. I mean, this story does so much of a better job than 3.0 when it comes to character integration from every single angle. Whether it's bringing older characters back into the spotlight or introducing entirely new ones, it feels like every character has a purpose. And more importantly, the story actually takes time to justify that purpose. Moving on to the next criticism that has always been directed at Wuthering Waves with regards to its presentation, the idea of the chosen one cliche. And this one is especially interesting because it is much older than the character integration criticism. I mean, ever since the game launched, this has been one of the biggest criticisms surrounding the Rover specifically. We saw it when we found out that the Rover was the arbiter of Joy, and by extension, very likely the arbiter of all the Sentinels. We saw it when we learned that the Rover was the leader of the Black Shores. We even saw it again as recently as when we discovered that the Rover had a history in Lahairoi. But really, moving on to the 3.5 story, of every single part of the story, the one thing that surprised me the most was how the writers chose to handle this criticism. I mean, yes, just like they did with Yang in this story, Wuthering Waves has told multiple stories where the Rover is pushed to the background while other characters take center stage. We saw it with Lupa, we saw it with Cortathea, we even saw it as recently as the Cyberpunk collaboration with Lucy. But despite all of that, Wuthering Waves has always made sure to remind us, the audience, that the Rover is still the special one. I mean, in Lupa's story, it was the Rover who Frolova chose to give the book that ultimately held all the solutions. In Cortathea's story, it was the Rover who received the massive power-up and defeated Fleur-de-Lis. Even in the Cyberpunk collaboration, where the game clearly wanted Lucy to be the lead, it still made sure that the Rover's massive presence was accounted for in battles, like the Rover being the only person able to move after Adam Smasher activated the Sandavistan in the final battle. I mean, that is how it has always been. No matter how present or absent the Rover was, the game always found a way to remind us who the main protagonist really was. This was the chosen one. This was the one who could do what nobody else could. But in this story, the writers very surprisingly chose to do the exact opposite. And there is no moment in the entirety of the story, hell, even in the entirety of Wuthering Waves, that captures this idea better than this.
The strange resonance is getting stronger. What is happening? Votary of the voice, do you finally understand? Who are you? Even if the choice before you is but a single stone cast into a boundless ocean, the ripples it creates shall touch the fate of the entire world.
And this is very interesting because you have to understand just how important a scene like this is in any form of media. This is the classic time stop scene, a trope that is always used to establish the importance of one character, and even more importantly, the relative unimportance of everyone else. I mean, that is why, as said earlier, moments like the Rover being the only one who could move during Adam Smasher's Sandavistan, or the Traveler being the only one able to move during this Dotori scene hit as hard as they did. Because more than anything, these scenes tell the audience that these characters can do the impossible, that they're the chosen ones, that they're the only one capable capable or chosen to do what nobody else can. So seeing the Rover treated as one of those background characters here, while Yang Yang is positioned as the more important character, is an incredibly bold and honestly risky decision for a game like this. But even more than that, I think this is Wuthering Waves directly responding to one of the oldest criticisms this game has ever had. And how they chose to answer is very interesting, because instead of making the Rover less of a chosen one, the writers instead created a world where there can be multiple chosen ones. And I don't know about you, but I genuinely cannot wait to see where this idea goes, because if the developers stick the landing with this trope, this could once again lead to one of those stories in Wuthering Waves. Now moving on to the entertainment side of the discussion, I think this is where the majority of the criticism surrounding 3.5 really comes from. And to be fair, a lot of that criticism is understandable, especially if you're looking at this story in isolation. Whether it's the idea that half the story spends a little too much time focusing on Yang Yang and their experience in this new region than the Rover themselves, or the criticism surrounding the antagonist, that they're simply not all that captivating or memorable, especially when compared to some of the villains we've had throughout Wuthering Waves history. I mean, these are criticisms that I think are completely fair, but we also have to understand that this story suffers from something that almost every gacha game struggles with whenever it reaches this point, and that is the fact that it is entering a completely new territory. I mean, this isn't like Septimont, where despite being a new region, it was still ultimately a part of Reignited. So the story had the luxury of being built upon ideas, conflicts, and character that already existed. No, this is not that. As far as the narrative is concerned, version 3.5 could essentially be the same as 4.0. It is introducing an entirely new region, an entirely new cast of characters, a setting that has virtually nothing to do with everything we've experienced in the entire 3.x series. And because of that, this story isn't just trying to tell a narrative, it also has to build an entirely new world, an entirely new culture, entirely new characters and terminologies from the ground up. It doesn't have the luxury of falling back on years of established lore, and I think that context matters. Because if you're being honest, as much as we all praise the entirety of version 2, or even the parts of version 3 that we have fully experienced so far, neither of those introductions, whether 2.0 or 3.0, were particularly memorable on their own. They were not masterpieces, but they did not need to be. They did exactly what they were supposed to. They introduced a new world, established a cast, laid the foundation for future conflicts, and left the story in a place where the versions that followed could truly shine. And honestly, that is exactly what I'm seeing in version 3.5. I see a story that understands its role, a story that was created to establish a new region, introduce a new cast, lay the groundwork for everything that is about to come next. And based on everything we've seen so far, I genuinely think it has done that job well. In fact, I think this version has set the stage for what could become one of Wuthering Waves' strongest story arcs. But that is just my opinion. What do you think? What are your thoughts on version 3.5 and the discussion surrounding it? Do you think I've covered the major points, or are there other perspectives you think deserve to be a part of the conversation? Tell me that in the comments below, and as always, I'll catch you in the next one.